To model the bottom section, I'm going to start out with a cylinder, and I'm going to need to really reduce the radius quite a bit. Change the rotation segments to 5, either 5 or 10, depending on the detail you need. 5 is going to be really good for us to be able to connect the petals to the right amount of polygons. So I just need to adjust the height. And I may end up using the point selection possibly in order to get that to line up correctly. But I will need to rotate the overall object once this is pretty much finalized. If you want to save yourself a little bit of time, you can turn on the fillet for the caps. Maybe set the segment to 2. And I'm going to go ahead and increase the height of the object just a little bit. What I do want to have is the object kind of dipping in towards the center. And I'm also going to have some areas coming off the sides. The fillet's really more for the bottom. I'm also going to switch over to the line mode so that I can see. And I'm going to change the segment amount, really reducing it. Let's go ahead and use 2, and let's go ahead and do 1 for the cap. And then I can adjust this overall amount. And we'll go ahead and do 3 or 4. Looks like that should be a good start. Keeping in mind we can always use hypernerves and increase the polygon level. So you can choose to copy and paste this in order to create a backup, which is what I just did. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit C on the keyboard to make this editable. Switch polygon mode, and starting at the top, going to select the live selection tool, this top area. I'm going to go ahead and bring that down, increase the scale, and then MT on the keyboard, so which is going to extrude, and then we can scale that down and dip that down a little further. So on the bottom, I'm going to go ahead and use the live selection to increase the size a little bit of that bottom fall-off area. We'll go ahead and increase the selection size, so we can go to Selection and Grow Selection, or UW, if using keyboard shortcuts. And I'm also going to go over to the rectangular selection and select the entire top section, and go ahead and scale that up, which means I might need to reduce the object size. So let's go ahead and grab the object, go to model mode, scale that down just a little. I'm going to go ahead and, well, I'm going to wait on the rotation just for the moment. Go back to the polygon mode, and we can use the live selection to select this bottom portion. And we're going to create kind of our extrusion from the bottom. So MT. And just do that twice for now. So I'm going to take these edges around the bottom, go over to the selection and select the loop selection. Select that edge and move that down. Same thing, loop selection, bring that down and adjust the scale a little. Looks like overall that should be okay. That top section I think I scaled down a little bit too much, so we're going to go back to polygons, just select those and scale them. Overall the object is still way too large, so model mode and just scale down the entire object. So now we can go back to the polygon mode, select the bottom cap, and just move that down. What I also want to do is deselect everything and go to Structure, actually, we do need to go to Functions and select Optimize. And we want to weld the points together. So I'm going to set this to 0.1 centimeters. And that way the caps will be connected, because by default the caps are separate objects. If you want to make sure that those are connected, you can go to Live Selection, just select part of the cap, and then under Selection you can select the Connected. And that's going to make sure and select everything that is connected to that, so that way you can really make sure that you have everything selected, or everything merged together. So what I want to have is some leaves coming off, and what I want to do for that is just use some polygons that are going to somewhat conform to the shape of the flowers, but I do want to leave a little bit open. I don't want to have any thickness to these, so one of the best things we could do is just take the edges, and I'm going to go to Selection and Loop Selection, and we can extrude this, which is one way to just get those out. Go to the attributes, and I will have to undo that. I might be able to adjust the end angle, but basically I don't want them to be connected. So we might have to turn off Preserve Groups. And now we can see where our leaves are going to be. And we will need to set up some sort of UV mapping. But I am going to go ahead and adjust some of these angles if needed. If we want to make it a little larger, we want to make sure we don't offset it that much, and then we can use scale beyond that. Because otherwise, scaling these up at this point is going to be a little more difficult to get them wider. So I'm going to reduce that amount, switch to scale, scale that up, and then MT again for the extrusion. And we're just going to have a little bit of bending. If needed, we might need to lift up those previous polygons or edges a little bit more. So let's just go ahead and extrude that, and 2 should really be okay. We can also set up a little bit of variation if you want to have some different sizes. But that's something I want to do after I've already set up the UV maps. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust my angle, and then go over to the polygon mode, and I'm going to select each one of these end polygons and just raise that up. And if you want something that's going to conform a little bit better, what you can do is add some polygons to create some triangles in these sections, just in between each of the leaves, or what's going to be the leaves. And then you just really need to modify the texture to fit. What I am going to do is go back to the edge mode, select the loop selection, so UL on the keyboard, and see if we can pull out that loop. I'm going to go ahead and switch to the size, and we might be able to avoid those extra polygons if we can scale this correctly to get a nice little blend. Either way, it'll work quite well. So now we need to decide how long our stem is going to be. At the moment, I think it's a little too thick. So we're going to start going to the rectangular selection, We can select all those edges, scale that down, move it up. Also going to stretch it on the y-axis. And then if we need to knife it, we can. I do want to have a decent length on here. Go ahead and select those bottom edges, scale that down. And I do want more of a bell shape towards the top. So we can also loop selection, scale that to match up a little bit better. And that should work out okay. So now we need to set up the UV map, which the current UV map may not be sufficient for what we need. What we can also do is select the bottom polygons. And using the live selection, select all 5 of those. And if you want, you can go to Structure, select Dissolve, Point Mode, just to make sure there's no extra points in there. It doesn't look like there are. So now we can just select this one polygon on the bottom, MT to extrude. And then we'll be able to set up the curvature for this a little later. Okay, so we're going to start right there. And what we need to do is figure out where we want to have our leaves. I'm going to go ahead and just rotate the entire object, going to the model mode. We do want to be able to line up, kind of get the leaves in between where the petals are. And if we have to increase the scale of the edges to fill it in a little bit more, we can modify those other polygons, or make them a little bit larger if we want some larger leaves, because at the moment these are going to be some pretty small leaves. So I think maybe one of the best things we can do is just take our edges, going around, probably switching the top view would be better for this. Select those outer edges and just scale that up. And if we were to select the inside edge as well, which I think in this case it would end up being the same as selecting polygons, we can just increase that overall scale and adjust how that's going to curve and conform. So I think we're going to go ahead and stick with that. You might need to add a little more detail to leaf polygons, maybe one more division. For the most part, this should be more than enough for any sort of distant details. We do want to make sure that we don't really have any flat areas, which does look like that might happen. So I'm going to go back to the edges and just select some of these inner edges. Scale that up. And you can do some pretty neat things just with the way you modify the polygons and their curvature. So we go into selection, go to loop selection, and select that inner set of edges. Pull that down a little bit. Increase the scale. And then raise the entire object up. And that looks like it should conform a little bit better. So now if we want to attach the cloner object to this object, what we need to do is set up a selection tag. So what we're going to do is select points and select that cylinder and just select these inside points. Now if you already had that set of edges selected, you can use the convert selection to switch from edges to points, and then that would convert that over once you click convert. We're not going to be using that because I've already got the point selected, and what we want to do is now go to selection, set selection, so we have a point selection. We'll call this petals. And now under the flower cloner object, we can switch this over to object mode. Take our object, change it to the cylinder, and our selection is going to be the petal tag, and it is set to vertex, which is exactly what we need. So it will start cloning them at those positions. We may need to modify the orientation, because it does look like it's not really being lined up correctly. And that's because of some of the changes I had made in the transformation, which was really just for that other cloner object. And they kind of look like they're inside out now. So what we can do is adjust the pitch to reverse it. So now we're down to about negative 150. Maybe we'll go a little bit lower. And that should bring us a lot closer to how we had it before. If you need to, you can go in a little bit further, create a different selection, but then you may need to modify the petal objects in order to conform correctly. But overall, it's starting to look pretty good so far. So what I want to do is now we can set up the UV map for this bottom section. And if we have to, we can create some tags, some selection tags to simplify things a little bit more. One thing I want to show really quick is if we do go back to the edges or select the points that are part of the selection, modifying these, I'm just going to go ahead and move them, will change the pitch of these petals. So you can set up different deformers in order to grow these over time if you wanted, and that's just one cool way to modify kind of a droop setting. If you have a bit of experience with espresso, you could also set up kind of a variable to go between two little changes of the basically these Y position of those points, and then have it create random clones from those variables in order to create a little more realistic scene with a lot more variation. So that's one cool thing you can do. Changing the size will also modify that, and I'm really not modifying the actual selection, I'm modifying the edges outside of it, but that's still modifying the direction of the vertex that is controlling the clone. So I'm going to go back into that cylinder and just, before we go ahead and UV map this, switch to polygon mode, live selection, select these inner polygons, and if we want to have a section come out in the center, we can raise that up, and that's also going to modify the clones. So I will need to adjust the cloner object, the transform. I may even need to select a more inward set of points, but it looks like this should be okay. So what I'm going to do is go back into that cylinder and expand my polygon selection. So selection, grow selection. And we could go out one further if needed, depending on where the leaf petals are going to be showing. Or we can just move that up a little bit more, and then we can just apply the selection tag a little bit larger. And I think I'm going to end up doing that. So I'm going to change my display. I'm also going to go ahead and select just basically everything in the scene and go to the model mode, just raise it up. And that way we're not looking through that grid the entire time. So now we're going to set up our selection tags. And I'm going to go ahead and rename this to stem. So we have it, our stem object. Go over to the polygons, and what we can do is expand this one more time. So U and then Y on the keyboard. And we're going to go ahead and set this selection to the center, rename it center. And the rest of this is almost all going to be one more selection. I am going to separate the stem, or the main part of the stem, from the rest of it. So select our polygons, make sure we have it selected all the way around. Really depending on how far up you want to go with it, you might go up a little bit more for the transition. And then set the selection, call this stem. And now we need the rest of the polygons. So we're going to go into live selection and just select these rows. And I'm just going to set it up so that the alpha doesn't start cutting out until a little bit higher. And that way we'll be able to form our leaves. Okay, so now we can set the selection, and we're going to call this leaves. And we'll also need to pick out a couple of textures for this. And that stem still looks like it might be a little thick. So what we can do is go back to the polygon mode and select our stem polygons and just scale that down. And I might go in and select those edges. Loop selection on the bottom, scale that up. Okay, so now we're going to set up the UVs. And we could really just set up one UV map. I'm not sure if we're really going to need to separate for the individual tags. Okay, so in the UV edit interface, I'm going to select the stem and start with the center. Go ahead and select the polygons and making sure that we're in the UV polygon edit tool and not the regular polygon edit, or we won't be able to modify anything. This is going to be pretty straightforward, and all we need to do is just kind of get it to look like a sphere. So let's go ahead and do world system, fit to selection, and select cubic 2. Actually, we could use regular cubic. And then we can do a boundary to circle, which might work out pretty well. It doesn't look like that's really going to round it off. So we'll just need to kind of do that manually and just pay attention to the texture. I am going to fit the UV to canvas. And if I have to, I can also scale that down just a little bit to give you some room. Since we're going to have selection tags for everything, it doesn't matter if they overlap. So now I'm going to select a different set of polygons, go to Live Selection Tool, deselect, and select stem. So these are all our stem polygons. We need to go to projection. Let's go to the average normal. Actually, we'll do world and cylinder. And it is selecting that bottom polygon as well, which right now is incorrect. So I'm going to go ahead and deselect that for the moment. Go to UV commands, fit the UV to canvas, and I might need to just add this polygon, remove it possibly from the selection tag, or create a new one for it. In the meantime, what I'm going to do is change the projection on this specific polygon, so just this one, we'll do flat and just scale it down to match kind of with the overall scale. Probably not really going to see that, so it's not really going to be that big of a deal. So we'll go back to live selection, deselect everything, and then go to our leaves, and select the polygons. And this is pretty close to being where I want it. I'm going to go back, set this to the world system cylinder. And we do have these separations, which I may not want. And what I'm going to do is go to the average normal and select flat. I think it's going to end up being easier just to get this in the right shape, or pretty close to it, just with the image map, and have to duplicate the leaves. I was originally planning it so it would be just kind of flat and just have one leaf that would mirror over. But that can sometimes cause problems with normal mapping when you have so many overlaps. Not necessarily going to be the case, but I think I'm going to set it up like this to begin with, and also make some modifications. Go to relax the UV. We might not be able to do that. So we can go over to the points and just kind of bring in some of these inside ones. Scale that up, just so they have a little bit of space within the UV. And also go ahead and move all of those up. And that should work out pretty well. And we just have to check the seams once we start to match these up to make sure that things are going to look correct. But for now, I'd say this is a pretty good start. Also, to make it a little bit easier for matching, what we can do is add that center selection, at least for the projection. So what I think I'm going to end up doing is going to our polygons, deselecting everything, and then go to our tags, select the center, and also select the leaves. And now when we go back to our projection, we're going to set that to flat. So now, while we're working on the texture, which I'm going to be doing in external editor using Photoshop, I can now match up that center selection with what's going to be the leaves, and not have to do any guesswork. So go ahead and reselect that center, and just make sure that those points line up correctly. It does look like it's going to be okay. So we'll just go ahead and use that. That should work out quite well. So to give me a little bit of a reference while I'm in Photoshop, just a quick and simple setup, what I want to do is go to File, New Texture from the texture window, create a new texture, and I'm going to select all the polygons with no tag selected, go to Layer, and create UV Mesh Layer. What we can also do is outline the polygons, and then save the texture. And I'm saving it as a layered TIFF file. Now I've already gone ahead and done this, but now when we go into Photoshop and open that up, we've got a UV mesh layer, and I did modify the background because it was white before, so couldn't really see the outline. But now we have a good reference for all of our layers to be able to design the texture to match that. So I'm going to go ahead and create this new texture, and then we can apply it to the model and move on.